We are so blessed with beautiful music in this church. Thank you both for your service to us. Our Old Testament lesson tonight is from Malachi 3, 1 through 4. See, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before you, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, indeed, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the descendants of Levi, and refine them like gold and silver, until they present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of old, as in former years. For those who are able, please stand for the gospel reading. From Luke 1, 68 through 79. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has looked favorably on his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a mighty Savior for us in the house of his servant David, as he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we would be saved from our enemies and from the hands of all who hate us. Thus he has shown the mercy promised to our ancestors and has remembered his holy covenant, the oath that he swore to our ancestor Abraham to grant us that we, being rescued from the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all of our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet in the way of peace. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Please be seated. So for those of you who weren't here last week, we spent some time with the prophet Jeremiah around the year of 587 BCE, which I'm sure you know exactly what was happening right at that time. But the temple had fallen, and both the northern and southern kingdom of Israel and Judah had fallen to the Babylonian Empire at this point. And the Babylonians had taken a good number of the Israelites with them back to Babylon to enslave them in the exile. They took the educated and they took the leaders. So the people that remained could not reform or restore their land, and that the people that they took could have their skills and talents used in service to Babylon. Now, it was 587 BCE, about 600 years before Jesus. So tonight we're going to deal with Malachi, and the assumption is that this is written in the post-exilic world. So the people have come back. Assyria fell to Babylon. Babylon ends up falling to the Persian Empire. And their king, a king named Cyrus, saw absolutely no reason to keep the Israelites in exile. He said, go home. Go home, rebuild your temple. Some of the Jewish people actually thought that Cyrus might be the Messiah because of how well he had treated them. So they go back and they start building the temple, rebuilding the temple. So this is a couple generations after where we were last week, but we're still about 510 maybe BC. So we meet up with Malachi in this text. And he's talking about like the refiner's fire, but there's something kind of going on here. It's a little bit of a backstory. The people, his people, the Jewish people, the Israelites, were upset. They were upset that God had not rebuked their enemies. They were upset that God didn't go after the people that had hurt them. They wanted justice. They were angry and they wanted justice. It didn't seem fair that they would have to suffer under the forces of these foreign nations that had just ripped their lives apart, and that no retribution would come to them, that God was just going to let that be. I think this is kind of a familiar feeling. That they wanted justice. I think we know what it's like to want God's justice to come banging into the world loudly and fiercely. We want that justice to come in and to take down those who are harming other people, to rebuke those who continue to destroy our communities. We want that justice against those who take advantage of the most vulnerable, those who are preying on the weak, and those who make our hearts stop with the type of violence that they bring into the world. The people want justice. And I think that that is a very fair thing to crave. It certainly is a human impulse to kind of want this retribution. But this begs a much deeper question, and it's the one that Malachi is asking his people. It's kind of the thing that he's naming in this text. So the people want justice, sure, right? But what does God's justice look like? Because we have our idea about what justice is going to look like. Okay, but what does God's justice look like? And Malachi speaks about this refining fire, that God's justice is like fire. Okay, so when we imagine justice, when we talk about that word, when I talk about that word, I don't know about you. So when I talk about that, it immediately has this kind of like punitive punishment tone, like somebody's going to get in trouble. As soon as I hear justice, it means somebody's going to get in trouble. There's like some punishment that comes along with it. And that can make this idea of like a fire that's refining kind of come across as like a hellfire, right? Like this justice that's going to harm. I try to think about the reasons of where this came from in my life, about why I respond like that. And maybe I heard some stuff when I was a kid, not from my family, but perhaps from the world, about that God had a fiery place that would deal with us. And I think about what it means that we live in a country that has a for-profit prison system. So when I think of justice, right, and I think of punishment, I do tend to kind of bring in that imagery of this type of prison system. I understand what it looks like when the way that we respond to violence is with more violence. I think that's kind of been the ways of this world for a long time. But I think that when we're talking about God's justice, we have to remember, we have to be more creative, and we have to remember that this is not just retributive, right? This isn't just a punishment. It's not just retributive. God's justice, real justice, is actually restorative. It actually makes a difference. It actually brings about change. And this is a very different kind of refining fire. Okay, this is a fire that brings about restoration, not a fire that brings about destruction. And restorative justice looks very different than passing out a judgment and walking away. It looks different than some eternal punishment. It certainly looks different than a dismantling of a people's sense of peace and protection. Maybe it's this misconception about what God's justice looks like that makes us kind of be a little weary of the God of the Old Testament. We assume that there is cruelty there. We assume these things because our idea perhaps of God's justice is this heavy-handed, unfair figure. But it's not really what it's supposed to be at all. This justice would be understood as restorative. And the thing about restorative justice is that it's absolutely 100% filled with love. Completely filled with love. It's the kind of love that changes things. It's the kind of love that rebuilds communities and that reaches across all of our differences and makes a way for God's grace. Justice means that change will come, that things are going to change, that they might even get better. Like the refiner's fire, where that heat and that glow, like it changes the metal. Things will melt down and change when God's justice is taking place. When God is doing God's work, change is always coming. Because that is the just response. things have to change. They can't stay the way that they are. They must move forward. They have to get better. We cannot simply continue on the way that we have been going as God's people. And this change will include God's continued kind of opening up to new things, to new people, to new communities. And this, my beloved, is what was happening during Malachi's day. This is what was happening. This is what the people were dealing with. The people had just returned from exile. They had suffered greatly. There is no doubt about that. The community got harmed by another outside community. But then they expect God to bring wrath down upon their enemies as if they were more favored. As if they too didn't do bad things, as if they were better than their neighbors. As if God also saw those people as outside community. Our limited view, that human limited view, that tribalism, that's part of who we are, but that's not God's view. God is way bigger than that. And I'm not trying to bash us and be like, humans are so bad, we're the worst, feel guilty, go home feeling horrible. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But I do think that as God makes this world better, and as we're part of that, we just can't remain isolated from each other. And we can't remain removed. I don't think we're going to get better by assuming that our community always has all of the right answers and like those people over there are wrong, right? Our Bible, our history, our recent news is just filled with examples over and over about how that mentality has just failed us. God's justice is so much bigger than our anger. God's justice is so much bigger than punishment. God's justice is love. And real love is the kind that grows. Real love is the kind of thing that makes us rethink everything that we know. Real love does bring change. And God had a plan to bring about change, to open the covenant beyond Israel, stretching out to the hearts of all people. Our Advent candle for this week is lit for love. Every tradition and every Advent wreath can use different ones for the weeks or whatever. I went with the classic Methodist one, so we went with love. For the love that God has for us. And this expansive love, it just continues to extend further and further out into the world. It's the kind of love that when it moves into our lives and it works within us, it helps us to be able to witness the places and ways that God's grace is working in the world. And being open to that grace, that love, means being open to change, which is really hard. Being open to change is really hard. The love of God is like a refiner's fire. It melts us and reforms us. It makes us stronger and better. We depend on that burn of change. But that's scary, okay? Because like the metal, when that heat hits us, we get soft and vulnerable. And we can be pushed and moved and changed. And that is a scary and difficult place to be. That is an open space. To be able to open ourselves like that to the work that God and the Holy Spirit want to bring into our lives, that's hard. And then at that point, once we're open and we're soft enough, we're fully dependent on God to remold us. Putting ourselves out there on faith and trust, even if we're reluctant, that's a risk. To trust that there will be room for all of us, to trust that God can make this into a peaceful planet if only we open ourselves enough to that warmth and that glow. That takes a lot. Change is really hard. And preparing our hearts to be changed is really, really hard. So I was looking for an example to talk about how change can be difficult. Some type of image. And I turned to the story of Zechariah, which brought me full circle back to what it means to be a parent, or the time of my life when I was an expectant parent, because that's where Zechariah is just getting out of in our gospel lesson. So change is hard. Just ask any expectant parent. So let's turn to our gospel lesson for today. This is still in the first chapter of Luke, but a lot has happened. So Zechariah is a descendant from the Levi tribe that's talked about in Malachi. He's a priest. And his wife is an ancestor of Aaron, the brother of Moses. Okay, and they're pretty well off. Okay, they're a pretty well-off couple. They would have a lot of respect in the community. Zechariah would have been a man who, when speaks, is listened to. And they're older in their years, and an angel visits Zechariah and says, your wife's going to be pregnant. And all these great things are going to happen. He's going to come before the Messiah. This is John the Baptist. Your wife's going to become pregnant with John the Baptist, right? And you're going to name him John. And instead of being humbled and being like, oh, that's amazing, God, he's like, are you sure? I don't know. And the angel Gabriel is like, I am the angel Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. And Zechariah's like, yeah, but you know. So God silences Zechariah for 9 months. For the entire pregnancy, Zechariah has no voice. He's allowed to write down words on a chalkboard, which says a lot about his education level at that time. But he is not allowed to speak at all. And he's told that he has to name the child John. And so the child is born, and it's not until they bring him to be circumcised, which is like our equivalent of having a baptism, right, that the people are questioning him about the name of the child. And Elizabeth says his name will be John, and they look to Zechariah to see if he nods, and Zechariah says his name will be John, and then he says the words from our scripture today, which is a song. And we'll get back to that, because whenever, you know this about me, whenever there's a song, whenever they start singing in the Bible, I have to retell it. Okay. But, change is hard, okay? Zechariah had to have his own reservations about the changes that God was going to be bringing into his world. At some point, he had to have made peace with the fact that he wasn't going to have children, right? And that he was at that age, and that was okay, and that was fine. He had his own ideas about how his life was going to be. And, he's talking to this angel about it as if any of those reservations that he has is going to stop this child from coming. Right? You're like, oh, I'm just going to decide not to do it anymore. She could just stop being pregnant. We don't have to go through that whole thing, right? Zechariah's hesitancy was not going to keep the baby from coming. The baby was coming whether or not they were ready for that change. Zechariah, like the people that Malachi was talking to in the Old Testament, he had his own ideas about what God's plan is and what God's plan should be, right? How that was going to all play out. And he tried to define the limits of what God's love could do, about what God's just-filled love was going to do. God's love, God's justice, is going to come into the world whether or not we're ready for it. And we can complain like the Israelites and be reluctant and push back like Zechariah did, but the baby is still coming. That's it. We can't stop the labor. It's not until the birth of John when Zechariah speaks again. Let's hear this now. The first thing that comes out is praise to God. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has looked favorably upon his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a mighty Savior for us in the house of his servant David, as he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets from old, that we would be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Thus he has shown the mercy promised to our ancestors and has remembered his holy covenant, the oath that he swore to our ancestor Abraham, to grant us that we, being rescued from the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, child, John, and you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give the light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. God took it upon herself to reach out to Zechariah and show him exactly how good God's justice and God's love is. This happens in so many ways that we hear in Zechariah's Benedictus here, this song. I'm going to talk about two because we're not going to be here all night. There's two ways that God deeply speaks in about love and justice here. First, there has to be something deeply transformative for Zechariah, for a man who is used to kind of having it all in his community, who's used to being heard more than most, to have to remain silent for 9 months. Silence has much to teach us. I had a horrible pregnancy. I had anemia, gestational diabetes. I was sick every day. I'll take it over being silenced for 9 months. I couldn't imagine, right? There's something about having to just listen all the time and to not be able to speak. You know, that the heart, it speaks so deeply into like the privileged parts of me, the parts that I share with Zechariah. But the silence probably enabled him to hear the other better, the voices that he could normally tune out. A stranger or someone different that he would normally not listen to, perhaps in that listening, becomes a neighbor or a member of the community, right? And all of a sudden, those people are not really that different than you. In his ability to hear and to listen and to perhaps not be perfect as his society would have it, maybe he began to understand that kind of love we've been talking about, that love that refines us in the fire, the one that makes room for others, the one that God's grace is constantly inspiring. Maybe his judgments that he could have had as a person of privilege turned into a judgment that true justice is that of love and God's love. The judgment is a refining grace. Maybe he began to realize that in this refining that God did to him, that his heart was being opened to a new love unlike anything he had ever experienced. Which speaks into the second thing that I think happened to Zechariah, as it happens to most parents. The second thing I think that Zechariah gleaned during his 9 months of silence, during Elizabeth's pregnancy, was about control. We, like the people in the day of Malachi, we want control. And as we've discussed, there's no controlling the love of God, right? Love is not about control. Ask any parent. But there's something about letting go of that control in parenting. When you come to terms with the fact that your child is and always will be so much more than your child, that they are their own person. This tiny little person and their future and their fate is not yours to control. Just as the Christ child will not be ours to control later either, but that's for later. Leading up to the birth of his son, Zechariah's heart grew every day. But so did that knowledge that the son would not be his own. This son would belong to God and to God's purposes in the world. That Zechariah did not have the cornerstone on how God would work through this child or in the life of this child or how this child would work into other people's lives. And that type of letting go, that type of trust is what love is all about. The baby is going to come. Whether we are ready for it or not, whether we mourn the loss of our old life or whether we are there ready to catch that infant in our hands. God's love, God's laboring love, like the refiner's fire, will continue to work for justice and restoration in the world. It will continue to grow and change, and it cannot be controlled. It's like a fire, a growing child, and a love that is unstoppable. Amen. For our time of reflection, if you're looking for something to wonder about and to pray on. I encourage you to pray to God, to ask where your heart can be stretched, to allow more love and more room for others.